The Ukraine war is 1 year old today.
As the fighting continues, millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes.
And Russian President Vladimir Putin has claimed that Ukraine's allies are planning to dismantle Russia.
China said that nuclear weapons must not be used in the Ukraine.
When up to 190,000 Russian soldiers invaded Ukraine in February 2022, even its most ardent foreign supporters expected the nation's far more limited defenses would collapse within days. But 1 year later, Russia has lost a reported 200,000 men, including many high-ranking military officials, and President Vladimir Putin has been embarrassed by the Ukrainian army's successes and the resilience of Ukraine's many citizen militias. The mood in Kiev is somber and defiant as Ukraine marks 1 year since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. A year on, thousands of soldiers and civilians have been killed in the conflict, while millions of Ukrainians have become refugees. Ukraine's gross domestic product shrank by as much as 35% in the last year, the World Bank estimates. How will the Russia-Ukraine war end? The war in Ukraine could continue as a war of attrition for months or even years, with neither side able to conduct an operation with a decisive outcome. The war, or this latest phase in a conflict that began in 2014 with the Russian military's illegal seizure of Crimea, has been a terrible tragedy for Ukraine and Ukrainians. Tens of thousands have died, including many civilians. The fighting has caused 13 million to flee their homes and become refugees outside of Ukraine or internally displaced within. The material damage to infrastructure, housing, and industry amounts to many hundreds of billions of dollars. At the same time, the war unleashed by Vladimir Putin has proven a disaster for Russia. Western officials estimate the Russian military has suffered some 200,000 killed and wounded in action. While not as devastating as predicted, Western sanctions have nevertheless taken a toll on Russia's economy. What might people misunderstand or underestimate about the conflict? Ukrainians see this war as existential. If they lose, their democracy is gone, and the vision of becoming a normal European state that motivates many of the young is gone as well. Moreover, Ukrainians have seen in Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, and many other cities and towns what Russian occupation means. A few weeks ago, I spoke to a former Ukrainian co-worker at the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. Life is tough. Electricity on 4 hours, then off 4 hours. Little heat and regular air raid alerts. But she was very clear. This is our land, and we will fight for it. Second, some people in America and Europe seem to misunderstand the roots of the conflict and have bought the Kremlin narrative that NATO enlargement caused the war. How do you anticipate the next year unfolding? Predictions are difficult. 1 year ago, few analysts in the West, and seemingly none in the Kremlin, would have forecast that the Ukrainian military would largely be holding its own in February 2023. That said, it seems clear Russia cannot win this war in the sense of achieving its original goals. Judging by the multi-vector assault on Ukraine 1 year ago, the Kremlin sought to quickly capture Kyiv and occupy the eastern 1/2 to 2/3 of Ukraine. Few serious military analysts believe the Russian military is capable of that now. What will it take to end the war in Ukraine? One side or the other has to score a decisive victory, or they need to get to negotiating a settlement. Moscow has advanced demands that must know are non-starters. The Ukrainians in early March 2022 sought to negotiate an end to the war and, among other things, offered to accept neutrality. However, the Ukrainian government's position hardened later in March as the liberation of towns such as Bucha and Irpin revealed large-scale Russian atrocities. It is not just the government's position that hardened. Polling shows an overwhelming number of Ukrainians support fighting to win and oppose negotiations. A long war holds no advantages for Ukraine, and sustaining public support for the assistance that Ukraine needs over the long term may prove a challenge for the West. I thus believe the West should provide Ukraine with significant military assistance now, so that the Ukrainian military can either push the Russians out or, at a minimum, make such progress on the battlefield that Kremlin calculations change and Moscow negotiates a settlement on terms that Kyiv can accept. However, even with such a settlement, Ukraine would continue to face a hostile Russian neighbor. The West would have to work with Kyiv so that it could maintain a robust, modernized military capable of deterring a new Russian assault in the future. That's all for today's video. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for more amazing videos.